It's June 17th, 2025, and I guess I want to talk about the Israel-Iran conflict, which is on its 5th or 6th day or something like that. So in order to do that, I guess I have to review lots of things. How many hours of YouTube videos do I have up? I have like some 40 hours. I don't think I'm ever going to go through and edit them. None of them have really been watched very much. I guess I'm okay with that. If I found that I was saying something that attracted a big following, then I would start to go in the direction of saying the things that brought me the big following, rather than keeping a certain purity of spirit about focusing towards the truth, regardless of whether or not anyone ever cares, you know? One of these days, maybe somebody could look through my YouTube videos and use AI or something like that and, you know, write a few page document about what this guy was saying. Who will ever care? But it's been good for me because it's really helped me to organize my thinking. And so anyway, I want to get back to Israel-Iran. First, I would talk about the nature of God. Okay. I hold axiomatically that there is a God, that God exists, and he's all-loving and all-powerful, all-knowing. I don't have any strict proof, just good argumentation for it. I do think that God doesn't know the future, because that is the best way to understand various aspects of reality that are otherwise very difficult to explain. He made a world so complex that he doesn't know what the future is going to be, because it's outside his ability to know. Could also be, you know, the idea that God has chosen that limit for himself. You know, he could know the future, but chooses not to know it, because it's sort of like letting a movie play itself out, you know, knowing the outcome of a movie. But I've speculated upon that. I don't know. He's all powerful, so he can make a world where he doesn't know what's happening. He can make dice where he rolls them, he doesn't know what comes up. We live in that world. And there's evidence that this universe existed, and look how big it is. Oh my goodness. We didn't know how big it was. We didn't know those stars up there were galaxies, hundreds of millions of light years away. We didn't know that until just 100 some years ago. We didn't know how big this universe was. And there's some evidence that this universe existed for at least 10 billion years before there was even life on the planet Earth. And then just 150,000 years ago, we as a species evolved and came into existence. 70,000 years ago, according to some genetic evidence and archaeological evidence, there was only like 1,500 human beings on the whole planet. They were all in one place, and all of us spring out of that group. Interesting. So I don't think God has ever touched the world. I think he's probably made this universe and probably many others that we'll never be able to see or detect. And he or she, God's watching all of them and seeing what happens. Maybe it's the process that God uses to become all-knowing. I don't know. And so this is a really interesting point, because this really helps me to understand how to feel about all kinds of things, like gay marriage, for example. How am I supposed to feel about gay marriage? Well, God made man and woman, and consequently, anything against that is a sin. It's like, well, actually, God made the universe and didn't know what was going to happen in it. And, you know, 4 billion years ago, life came into existence on this planet. And I suppose God was like, oh, look at this. This is interesting. Complexity's happening over here. And he's watching the complexity arise. That he didn't even know there was going to be, you know, as a rule, 2 sexes. You know, he didn't make us this way. He found us. He made a universe that produced us. And here we are. That's my theological viewpoint. Not to say that any of the old religions, you know, and just thinking of the big 3 monotheistic ones of Judaism, Catholicism, Islam, not to say that they were stupid. They just didn't have the evidence we have. But pretty hard to come to those conclusions that I'm coming to when you had the idea that we are in a fallen nature and that there's angels and that, you know, you think the world's flat. You think God made us so that we could worship him. That makes a lot of sense. We exist to worship God. We exist because it pleases God for us to search for him. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense that could be the answer of reality. But I don't think so. There's plenty of mathematical evidence, the idea of computational irreducibility, the idea that there is a set of rules underneath the laws of physics that we do understand that produce the laws of physics. And we're probably coming pretty close. String theory, other ideas, computational processes. We're coming close to understanding what those underlying ideas are. Okay, so, if you want to decide what's good and bad, what's ethically right and wrong, you have to square away your understanding of God. And so you can always just be an atheist and conclude there is no God, and that may be true. But I don't know. I don't think so. And I think that there is an all-loving God there. Of course I could be wrong, but I think there is one. When you die, God takes responsibility for the fact that he created a system that produced self-awareness. And anything that has become self-aware, I suppose, God's going to take care of you later on, one way or another. Probably true for orcas and dolphins, maybe even orangutans and etc. And thus, some human beings have had such miserable lives. Nothing good ever happened to them. And it's like God's sitting here going, maybe I should just shut this world off because of how horrible a life this one person may have had. That's true. But then I think that it's an integrated whole. Reality is an integrated whole. You change one thing about it, then in God's imagination, at least he can already see two different trains of reality. He can see one where he touched the world and one where he didn't. So I think we live in a world that God has never touched and will never touch. And he's going to let it play itself out. Primarily because I think most of us want him to. Most of us we may have had lives of hard work, servitude, and debt, and problems, and etc. Prison, whatever. But we know other people have had better lives. And it's like, good for them. Wish I was one of them. And maybe in another iteration of this world, I'll have, a better shot at things. And it's also, since we exist, and eventually all human minds, I hope, all human minds eventually realize that there are other people out there. I don't know when that happens to you, when you're 4 years old, 5 years old, I don't know. There's other people out there who experience things just like you. And so you got to think about it in terms of that whole. So then I go to, against that background, how do I think about Israel and Iran? Of course I want to take a simple approach to it, which would be, 70 some years ago, Harry Truman made the decision, I guess also with the Congress and the United Nations, that Israel exists, that Israel will be supported by America. And that decision, we followed through on for how many years now? 70, 80 years. And so whatever Israel is going to do, we support Israel, and that's that. Pretty valid way to look at things. Simple, straightforward, easy. I can't figure out the complexity of Middle Eastern problems, but thank God we have, elected representatives who make that decisions for us. A president, and I hate Trump, there's no question about that. I still haven't gotten over the birth certificate. You know what I mean? It's like all these, it just makes so many people laugh when I talk about that. It sounds so like, what are you talking about? But it's like, from the very beginning when he started his public life, he attacked Barack Obama's birth certificate. And I was like, what? I never forgave him for it, and he's never apologized. So every time he's ever done anything, had two different ways of looking at it. I always looked the way that was less favorable towards him. So the gap between me and those people who worship him is so vast. It doesn't matter. You have a Senate, a Secretary of State, a president. These are the guys who are supposed to figure out those problems for you so you can get about your life. And that's the basic point of a representative democracy. More deeply, in defense of Iran, I would argue all politics is local. If you want to be able to lead your people, you want to be in charge, I suppose sometimes you have to say and do things they don't really believe in. And it's so like they have to go all these years since the Islamic Revolution happened. I think it was in the 1970s, they've been going death to America. America's the great Satan, death to Israel. Israel's the little Satan, or whatever they would say. And this is what rallied the troops, which is what got the more zealot top 1 or 2% of the people to rise up and be part of the Revolutionary Guard or whatever it is that Iran has. And then, here it is, all years later, death to America, because, what choice do you have? You got to keep doing what you've been doing all these years. And it's like, yeah, death to America, sure, pal. Okay, keep saying it. Go ahead. Saw what happened to Saddam Hussein. He kept saying that. Once we got an excuse, however poor the excuse was, we took his ass out and had him hung. Oh, boy. So it's like all politics is local. And so did Israel attack Iran in a completely unprovoked way? And the answer to that is clearly no. There was provocation. How serious was the provocation? There's definitely, like Bernie Sanders, he attacks Benjamin Netanyahu. Of course, I point out Bernie, he's a Jew, a Jewish guy, and Benjamin Netanyahu is a Jewish guy. And both obviously leaders of the people, in America for Bernie, and there, Bernie Sanders gets a lot of criticism, Benjamin Netanyahu. So I don't know. In the final analysis, I tend to just go along with the viewpoint. I know this personally, and this is a very deep thing to say. If I was in Israel on a tour and war broke out, would I join the IDF? If they asked me to, can you help us defend the country or fight? I would, sure. I'd join the IDF in a second. I'm an Irish Catholic. I'm a son of Martin Luther, essentially. My father's family is all from that part of Germany. But my mom's Irish Catholic. But yeah, I would absolutely join the IDF, no question. Now, how about I was touring Lebanon, or I was touring Jordan or something like that, and war broke out between Israel and Jordan? Would I join the Jordanian army? No, I'd be like, here's my American passport, like, get me out of here. Of course I wouldn't. I definitely, see, everyone on the planet matters just as much as everyone else. But, and that's an absolute truth, but we need to team up to survive. This world is a very subtle place. You need to kill to live sometimes. You need to, in order to survive, you need to do very hard things. And so, what am I trying to say here? What I'm trying to say is, groups, we have no choice but to team up, so, all evil that exists in this world comes from me thinking I matter more than everyone else, or me and my family matters more than everyone else, or me and my town matters more than everyone else, and expand it. Until the best of us are like, everyone matters just as much as everyone else. And at which point, the useful idiot concept, that's Stalin going, oh, that's a useful idiot over there. Because if that group is dead set on attacking my group, and I'm going to sit here and go, hey, everyone matters just as much as everyone else, and therefore I'm not supporting the war effort or something, I'm the reason why my group loses. So what you have to do at all times is you have to make a call. You have to make a judgment. Pacifism, some people can choose pacifism absolutely, and Some of them can absolutely garner my respect. Absolutely they can. But I can't do it. Sometimes it's just necessary to go to war, and sometimes it's just necessary to do your part. And so, I mean, okay. Boy, it would take me a really long time to explain this, but let me try to say it as quickly as I can. I absolutely would love it if in the American Constitution it said that America, it is the fundamental platform of the American people to end all war. And the only way that can be achieved is if everyone agrees not to go to war anymore and stops making weapons and allows for reciprocal inspections to see that weapons are being discarded, thrown away, and not being built anymore. Worldwide, everyone's on board. The moment one group is not on board with this, then you have to have weapons. You have to build, and you have to have an army, and you have to put value of your country towards creating it. So it's like, it's begin with the end in mind. What is it that I want? I want a world without war. How do I achieve it? Well, by being very, very careful and being ready for war until everyone agrees that we end war by a mutual disarmament that's verifiable and inspectable by both sides across the whole world. It's fantasy, I know. So it's like, okay, since that can never happen, well, in the first place, I don't know, maybe it's possible. I don't know. It's what I want. Let's just say that clearly. Now that I know that that's what I want, I'll do what's necessary to make sure that my people, my group is defended properly. And that begins with me, me, my family, the city of Philadelphia, Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, America, North America. I absolutely would be proud to defend Mexico from an invasion. I can imagine Mexico being invaded by anyone, but there it is. Because I feel Mexico is much, much closer to my heart than, say, India. Not as close to my heart, but everyone matters just as much as everyone else. And in a way, the whole world is my heart. So I guess, if I ran for president, if I started my own political party, which, here, I'll do that. I'm running for president. I'll start my own political party. I'm not going to quit my day job. I'm going to continue to teach and continue to drive. And what other jobs have I done in my life? I've waited tables, maintenance, built houses, worked in the legal field. I was a legal secretary for a while. I mean, I just know that the jobs I do are useful. So I continue to do those. I can't, go off and do something that's just absurd and ridiculous. Go out and burn my responsibilities that I have to basic and important things. But if I were to run for president, and if I were to declare which political party I was a part of, I would create my own political party. I would call my political party the conventionists, conventionism, and because I would want to write a new American Constitution. And the main reason why I want to write a new American Constitution is to make people go over the old one and deeply understand it and prioritize what's important about this Constitution, And so we don't forget things like Khashoggi, the freedom of press, but yet you have a prince of Saudi Arabia who murdered a guy, and because his oil is so important, you ignore it. I don't know. I can't do that. You gotta go back over all the principles that are in the Constitution and remember what's important about them. There's so many parts of that we've forgotten. A standard example that I use is there's a part of the Constitution that says, no attainder of treason shall work corruption of blood. It's like, what the hell does that mean? Well, it's, the king, if you were guilty of treason, the king would kill your whole family. You know what I mean? Corruption of blood, if you're guilty of treason, then your whole family is. Right? Well, we outlawed that in the Constitution. I remember, I think I had a family member that used to always, a distant family member, but used to always beat on me about the idea that the sins of the father transfer down to the sins of the son. That's not true. And even the prophet Ezekiel argued that it wasn't true, or commanded that it wasn't true, or had it revealed from God to him that it wasn't true. You read Ezekiel, he'll say that that's not true, But I don't even think sin's an accurate model for understanding our behavior at all. You have to think about the theory of evolution, what led to our survival. And we absolutely want to embrace some aspects of our humanity 100%, but there are certain aspects of our humanity we want to distance ourselves from. We need to fight against those aspects of our humanity. That part of us that would seek to do evil to others for our own benefit. That's a part of us that we need to suppress. Whereas the desire to dance around the campfire at night, that's a part of us I think we should embrace. And that's how it goes. And so clearly with this attitude about God, you can understand why I wind up being pretty strongly on the liberal side about things. I think I don't think there's any absolute ethical rules. I think, ethical rules can be good. They can be good, ways for you to try to understand what to do. And when you can't figure something out, just follow the rule. But in the end, I don't think there's any absolute ethical rules. I think everything is situational, no exceptions. So there are some abortions that were terribly wrong, and there were some abortions that were absolutely correct. And on and on and on like that. There were some words that were terribly wrong, and there were some words that were absolutely correct. And dropping this bomb and when this group of people over here and a bunch of innocent people die might have been an absolutely appropriate decision to make. It's all situational. And sometimes you just really can't know. So I look at what's going on. I mean, it seems pretty clear that Israel had been planning for a very long time to do the kinds of things that they're doing currently. The whole setup on the Hezbollah with blowing their hands off with those things, that was brilliant, man. That was a really, really, really good move, And to the extent that my imagination is correct, I don't know. You tell me if my imagination's wrong. These were people that were saying death to Israel all the time. These were people that were firing rockets whenever they could. These were people who were setting the stage for doing whatever they could to punish Israel for being Jewish, or to punish Israel for their past injustices that they've done. And so what a targeted revenge. What a targeted, not only revenge, but a targeted, military tactic. I have to support it. God, I hope World War III doesn't break out. I mean, what's the probability of World War III? It ain't zero. Missiles flying between Iran and Israel. I hope what Iran's going to be trying to do is genuinely cave in, genuinely promise to stop building a nuclear weapon and sue for peace. And then maybe their Ayatollah or whatever he is will stop getting in front of crowds of people and saying death to America every freaking day. My imagination tells me that he does that. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, it's propaganda, right? Truth is truth, but I assume that's what he does. Okay. All right, anyway, I was talking about becoming president, my political platform. So I'd rewrite the Constitution. I would add to the Constitution the ability to levy a one-time, emergency or extraordinary tax on the rich in order to be able to balance out our debt problems. I would definitely institute universal basic income. And with the universal basic income, everyone getting, $30 a day, but it will take a while to get there because you have to see what effect it has on people to slowly but surely give everyone a certain amount of money every day. You have to start with a very small amount and increase it. It'd be very easy to do. You just offer the contract to whatever corporation has the capacity for setting up the online accounts. Apple, Google, variety of other corporations, Microsoft could certainly do this. So once you got a universal basic income going, you can start to talk about reparations. I think the number one way you start reparations is you offer to everyone. If you want reparations, you get an extra penny every day, or extra penny every month. But it tags your account for being a person who says they want reparations for past injustices. And there's going to be plenty of people who don't want it, don't care. I'm Irish. I'll be like, because my ancestors, Irish people, were always mistreated, so therefore I want reparations. Okay, sure. And then it goes from there, and you start to, historians and people, and eventually votes happen, and reparations for certain groups could be increased. Obviously African Americans, people can show that they're direct descendants of slave plantations. Certain Indian tribes, maybe all of them. Maybe the Irish. The Irish once a year should get a penny and a bottle of Jameson. It is what it is. I mean, so you can deal with reparations through universal basic income for sure. And, it definitely, definitely have a constitutional provision that says that America seeks to eliminate all war for all humanity for all time from here on out. But barring our inability to do that, barring the agreement of others to go along with it, then America is always going to seek to be ready for war. And that's the best way to peace. I don't know, I think of a lot of other things I would want to do. But, we're in the situation we're in. When Donald Trump got elected, I was kind of horrified. I still am, but, and it made me seem like he wasn't going to be able to appoint it. He was going to be able to appoint his cabinet without Senate confirmation. Every single one of his cabinet got Senate confirmation. Even Mark Rubio got a unanimous vote, which I was very happy to see. Gives him a certain gravitas in that cabinet for sure, unlike the Secretary of Defense who could only get the Republicans to vote for him. And then, other things, what's going on with the immigration thing is just, again, it's just such a bunch of bullshit. We're all being forced to focus on something that's just not worthy of the level of focus, I just saw a little blurb on Google that Donald Trump's already spent more than $1 billion that have been authorized by Congress, more than $1 billion over what's been authorized by Congress to enforce immigration policy. And the fact remains is we have the immigration policy that we have. And you do what look at the Obama speech on immigration that he gave. And it was like, but we only have, it comes down to the fact that if Congress is only going to authorize this much money for it, then that's it. You enforce it with the amount of money that you have. And you obviously prioritize. You leave some hardworking person alone that's out there picking strawberries or cleaning hotel rooms and stuff. And you focus on criminals, Of course that's what you do. This guy, just how disruptive and how horrible he is. I don't know if it's by design or if he's just stupid. I mean, immigration is an easy fix. It's an easy fix if people just get along with the actual fix. Anybody who's been in this country from some point backwards, I don't know, April 1st, 2024 or something like that. Anybody who's been in the country automatically can apply for a working permit, a Z permit or something, and they have the right to stay in America basically forever. I never said they could become citizens. That's a whole different thing. If you started out in America illegally, maybe becoming a citizen is never possible for you. You know, only people who followed the rules, who came over already with working permits and were brought up because somebody did it through the immigration policy the right way. Those guys, those women, they can become American citizens more easily. But it doesn't mean that we can always, and we already do this. We have a cap on how many citizens can be created every year through the naturalization process, and that's logical. You know what I mean. You have a cap. Here's this whole argument that you hear from Trump that they're bringing the Democrats are bringing immigrants in so they can vote for them, and it's like false, and more false, and still false, and absolutely full of bullshit. And it's just not the way it works. And most immigrants I know wind up being Republican anyway. Just because they're, because the right has always kind of won this. I don't understand why they're able to do this, but they're always able to make it seem like they're more patriotic than the left, and I just don't think that's true. I guess, come to think of it, the basic reason why the right seems more patriotic than the left is because people on the left are more willing to look at the principle that everyone matters just as much as everyone else, whereas the right-wingers are more like me and my group, and those guys over there suck. Kill them all, something like that. I'm being facetious here. But after you make it clear who is legal, then you also bring all law enforcement. It has to be brought in when enforcing the border everywhere. And so if you don't have your working permit after a given day, you don't have your working papers after a given day, then it's like things become really, really, really difficult for you. You can't even, you can't even go into a grocery store. It'll be, just set it up and make it so that nobody would even want to come to this country because of how difficult it is to survive here. And then we start to open up immigration lines from, to the extent that, a growing population is good for us, a younger population is good for us. I really think we should just have a completely open border with Mexico. I've been saying that for years, and I still visualize it and see it. It's obviously good. The, Mexican citizens should be allowed to come to America, go to our schools, work, own property, all that stuff. I just, and hey, not in the short term. They should never be allowed to vote or sit on juries or own guns. But I don't know, why not United States of North America? At some point where that even becomes possible. It always could start slow. A Mexican citizen who's been in America for 20 years, working hard, owns property, needs a firearm to protect themselves or their money deposits every night or whatever it is, they could always apply and get it. You know what I mean? I don't know, we could always, there's so many ways we could do things better. That's why we really should write a new constitution. So everyone gets on board with arguing, discussing with each other exactly how we want to have a lot of our basic policies, I used to think, after Sandy Hook, I used to think I wanted to take all guns away from everyone in America. It's like, look what happens, look how bad it is. But I've definitely changed my mind on that. The idea that people should be allowed to have guns is obvious to me now. I just keep looking at the horror of Sandy Hook and the horror of the Pulse nightclub, the horror of what happened in Las Vegas, the horror of San Bernardino, the horror of all these mass shootings. And it's like anything to try to stop these fucking things from happening, But I think there are ways that we can drastically reduce mass shootings and simultaneously allow for gun ownership. I think there are ways to do that. And I think in the end, it's probably good for our culture to do it that way. And I think with a new constitutional convention, we could come to an agreement about it. The left and the right could work out the details of how we want to do this thing. I really wouldn't want to be president if we didn't have the opportunity to make a revolutionary change about the Constitution at its heart, because that's what we need to do. And if we're not going to do that, I can think of a lot of better people to be president than me. You know what I mean? It's like, it's definitely, I can think of a lot of Democrats and some Republicans for sure. They would just way better, more competent at administration, more competent at the ins and outs of how Congress works, more competent with dealing with the legal system and et cetera than I would ever be, Okay. Yeah, I'm rambling. I love you all. Peace.